Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hivemind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Well, we've said it a million times and I'll say it again, rules for thee and not for me, rules for conservatives and rules for Democrats, or lack thereof. It's a topic we cover very often, and more importantly, headed to January 6th right around the corner and a massive pro-Trump rally on the schedule, this exact idea is playing out in such an overt and obvious form, it's absolutely unbelievable. Isn't it funny how Democrats all of a sudden care about public safety? Isn't it interesting how all of a sudden, when they can make right-wingers the villains and pretend as if there's some sort of threat of insurrection or violent riots, they're right on the case? But then when it's Antifa and BLM, and even going into January 6th, we know the real issue of actual violence and riots and threats is all going to come from left-wing sources, but the Democrats and DC officials only care about castigating right-wingers. Well, that's exactly what's playing out. We all know who Enrique Tarrio is, right? A misunderstood man. I'd say a man who has been slandered in the media a million different times. Right now is the leader of the Proud Boys, a group that is claimed to be white supremacist when their leader is literally an Afro-Latino. Well, they just arrested him on some bogus BS charge, which was already deemed unconstitutional. Rules for thee and rules for me, rules for conservatives and rules for Democrats. And so folks, I gotta show you guys this. We gotta talk about it, the absolute lunacy of it, and then we'll go into some other examples that I think prove the same point. Let's focus on that double standard for conservatives in respect to Democrats. But before we get into any of it, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, share the video as much as possible. We are still shadow banned by the YouTube algorithm, hidden from non-subscribed viewers. Now with that out of the way, let's roll the tape. All right, so first off, we've got this reporting from the Post Millennial. Leader of Proud Boys arrested in Washington, D.C. The leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, was arrested Monday on charges of destruction of property. The arrest occurred as he arrived in D.C. to protest the congressional certification of the election later this week, according to the New York Times. The charges laid on Tarrio are related to a banner burning incident occurring last month. He is suspected to have pulled a Black Lives Matter banner off of a historic black church and subsequently burned the banner. The Metropolitan Police Department also confirmed that upon his arrest, he was found to be in possession of 2 high-capacity firearm magazines and charged accordingly with possession. And so if you look around, if you look at some different headlines, people are calling this a Proud Boys hate crime on a black church, when the man who did it is a black man, and it's not a hate crime if you're targeting a political organization that you disagree with. It's a property crime, that's 100%, and even Enrique Tarrio admits that. In an interview with the Washington Post, Tarrio himself admits to the burning of the banner. "Let me make this simple," he said. "I did it." Tarrio also allegedly told Proud Boys to come to DC and do so incognito. And we've also got this right over here from Catherine Herridge. Hashtag Proud Boys source familiar with case tells CBS News a charging decision is pending on new facts in the Enrique Tarrio case, specifically possession of 2 high-capacity magazines, which is a DC felony, could warrant stay-away order from DC. But I find that a little bit interesting, considering this ruling that we have from August 2020, Federal Appeals Court throws out California ban on large-capacity gun magazines. So theoretically, if the ban was to go to an appeals court, to the Supreme Court, it wouldn't be all so surprising that this legal precedent would apply in DC as well. But of course, they're using it as an excuse to either kick him out of the state or charge him with a federal crime. And if you think that they didn't overtly try to go for Enrique Tarrio and make sure that he gets charged up real quick before January 6th, then you have another thing coming. This is done on purpose. I mean, just think about the gun crimes, think about the possession of illegal weapons, think about the property crimes that Antifa and BLM have been doing over the last couple months with near impunity. Think about how many of them got off scot-free, how many of them went through the revolving door of the prosecutor's office in places like Seattle and Portland. Democrats can do no wrong. Democrats are justified in their behavior in their mostly peaceful protests for racial solidarity. Meanwhile, right-wingers are treated as domestic terrorists when they're literally mostly peaceful. It's a backwards world, folks, and there's a double standard that's so clear you have to be wearing blindfolds not to see it. But speaking of gun laws, and speaking of rules for thee and not for me, one Republican who gives no hoots is Lauren Boebert, who's headed to Congress with her Glock. Regardless of what the far lefties say, check this out.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a newly elected congresswoman from Colorado. Even though I now work in one of the most liberal cities in America, I refuse to give up my rights, especially my Second Amendment rights. I will carry my firearm in DC and in Congress.
And I have to say, that is one of the most based political ads I've ever seen. I'm pretty sure it was directed by the exact same person who's doing the ads for Kim Klacik. And I'd also have to say, these ads are a whole lot more empowering for women than anything the modern feminist movement has ever done. And it's also no surprise that the freshman class headed into the House in 2021 is much more diverse and has a whole lot more representation of women on the GOP side than it does on the Democrat. But let's continue down the trend of rules for thee and not for me. Who remembers during the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett a couple months ago how Democrats were freaking out? How could you ask for a vote, an in-person vote? How dare you?
How dare you? You have stolen my dreams.
How dare you show up to vote in person during the COOF pandemic? Well, it seems like they sing a different tune when it comes to voting for Nancy Pelosi's speakership. Pelosi ignores COOF guidelines at congressional swearing-in ceremony. And so some people, some congressmen and women on the Democrat side who had tested positive for the COOF and were supposed to be quarantining showed up to vote. Nancy Pelosi once again proving the Democrat mantra of rules for thee and not for me, an absolute double standard and total hypocrisy. But let's continue on. This time, Kamala Harris, once again proving how much of a phony she is. You know, I thought plagiarizing was Joe Biden's thing. He's been caught on it, what, a million different times by now. It caused him to resign the 1987-1988 election all those years ago. He is known as an overt plagiarist and liar, and we've covered it on this channel forever. Well, turns out Kamala Harris, surprise to no one, is the exact same thing. Of course, we know her famous "I used to listen to Tupac and smoke grass back in college" before Tupac and Biggie were even stars. But don't pay attention to that, you bigots. Let's stay on the topic. Kamala Harris accused of stealing Freedom's story from MLK interview in Playboy. Yup, she's literally plagiarizing MLK and expecting to get away with it. Here's the story, a little excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr. all those decades ago. "I will never forget a moment in Birmingham when a white policeman accosted a little black girl, 7 or 8 years old, who was walking in a demonstration with her mother. 'What do you want?' the policeman asked her gruffly, and the little girl looked him straight in the eye and answered, 'Freedom.' She couldn't even pronounce it, but she knew. It was beautiful. Many times I have been sorely trying situations, and the memory of that little one has come into my mind and has buoyed me." And so Kamala Harris thought it was touching. She thought it was a great story. Instead of sourcing it, instead of citing Martin Luther King and giving him credit for his story, she instead does exactly what you'd expect from a grifter politician, especially on the Democrat side, and flat out steals it for herself. Senator Kamala Harris started her life's work young. She laughs from her gut, the way you would with family, as she remembers being wheeled through an Oakland, California civil rights march in a stroller with no straps with her parents and her uncle. At some point, she fell from the stroller. Few safety regulations existed for children's equipment back then. So not only is she a victim now, but she was a victim back then too when she was a kid in the stroller. And the adults, caught up in the rapture of protest, just kept on marching. By the time they noticed little Kamala was gone and doubled back, she was understandably upset. "My mother tells the story about how I'm fussing," Harris says, and she's like, "Baby, what do you want? What do you need?" And I just looked at her and said, "Freedom." An absolute joke, as if she remembers it all so clearly when she was in a stroller, probably 2 years old. I highly doubt it. And obviously eerily similar to the MLK story, and eerily similar to her egregious track record of lying and Joe Biden's awful track record of plagiarism. And speaking of Joe Biden's awful track record, that track record is seemingly ready to continue. We just made a video earlier today talking about his most recent cabinet picks being pay-for-play politicians headed back to the status quo of the Obama and Bush years of the past. And once again, rules for Democrats, rules for Republicans. Joe Biden can get away with whatever he wants. And in this case, get away with selling out American interest. Iran begins 20% uranium enrichment at underground facility and seizes foreign oil tankers. It's funny how all of a sudden, as tyrants around the world are expecting a Biden presidency, they start stepping on America's toes. Woke Lancet Journal calls on Biden to vastly increase funding of the UN and the WHO. And so the globalist unelected rackets, less American freedom, less American safety, and anti-American dictatorships across the world feel emboldened under the potential of a Biden administration. And we know, considering the double standard, the media won't challenge it, they'll perpetuate it. That's a video that I got for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, share the video as much as possible. We are still shadow banned by the YouTube algorithm, hidden from non-subscribed viewers. yours. So make sure to share the video, make sure you're subscribed. Now I gotta get back to work, of course. There's a whole lot of hypocrisy that must be exposed on a daily basis. You know, when I was a young kid and Susan Wojcicki and YouTube were whacking me with a baton and telling me what I could and can't say, and they asked me once, they said, "What do you want, kid?" And all I said was freedom. And so all I want is freedom, and I will continue to fight for freedom. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.